Welcome everybody. It's going to be an absolutely marvellous debate tonight. This is the topic of the millennium and how perspicacious of all of you to manage to get tickets tonight to be here. We are going to have a tremendous time. We've got an outstanding panel on both sides. We have a tremendous motion. We have a wonderful audience. And you've managed to brave your way through hellish weather. Sorry, I can't say that, can I? That's compromising my neutrality. But let's get straight on. And we're going to start with Richard Harris. Richard Harris, former Bishop of Oxford. Richard.
Good evening, everybody. It's very natural for parents to be proud of their children, and three mothers were once discussing their achievements. One said, "My son's an ambassador. When he comes into the room, he's addressed as Your Excellency." To which the second mother responded, "My son's a cardinal. When he comes into the room, people call him Your Eminence." The third mother simply said, "My son is 6.5 feet tall with shoulders as wide as a barn. When he comes into the room, people get to their feet and say, 'My God.'" Obviously, nobody here believes in that kind of God. And this poses the question of what God we have in our minds when we say we believe or we do not believe. That is the question, ladies and gentlemen, at the heart of this debate. What kind of God do we accept or reject? Because there are many, many different kinds of atheism. So let me begin by emphasizing that I understand all too well and have the deepest respect for certain forms of atheism. The atheism of Camus in La Peste or Ivan Dostoevsky in The Brothers Karamazov haunts and challenges believers, perhaps even more than unbelievers. That kind of atheism is an all too plausible view of the universe. But what we're dealing with this evening is what has been termed the new atheism, associated particularly with its attack dogs, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, and very sadly from my point of view, my friend Richard Dawkins, who writes such wonderfully inspiring books on science. So it is not atheism as such which is being debated this evening, which in some forms I very deeply respect, but this new atheism that is the new fundamentalism. Now, I would suggest that fundamentalism has four main characteristics. First of all, it's impervious to the facts. Nothing is allowed to count against it. Creationism, the belief that the world was created in a very short time, as it were, ready made, is denied by every possible branch of science, cosmology, paleontology, geology, etc., etc. But apparently the combined results of all these scientific disciplines refuses to shift the creationists. But fundamentalism doesn't only take a religious form. It took a political form in Soviet-style communism, and I think we'll all be aware of that, so I'm not going to elaborate it. Now, it seems to me that the new atheism has this feature of fundamentalism, is that it simply does not allow the strong case, to count in any way at all. It ignores the fact that the greatest philosophers in Western society down the ages for 2,000 years or more have either been religious believers or have had a philosophy which points to religious belief. They simply do not take that into account. They ignore the fact that the great inspiration behind Western art over countless centuries has been the Christian faith, and it continues to be so. The two poets universally regarded as the greatest poets of the 20th century, T.S. Eliot and W.H. Auden, were both serious Christians. Today you could count half a dozen or more of the world's greatest composers who are passionate about the Christian inspiration of their music. James Macmillan, Arvo Pärt, John Tavener, to just mention three. But all this, the new fundamentalists simply seem to block out of their minds altogether and don't let it count against them. And this leads to the second feature of fundamentalism. It always picks on the weakest points in another person's arguments. But is it not true that if you're really confident of your case, you face the opponent's strongest argument? You don't simply always focus on their weakest arguments. And then thirdly, this points to the kind of God which is so often criticized. Many of you will have read Philip Pullman's wonderful, wonderful book, The Dark Materials. But can you remember the kind of God that is pictured in that? A kind of wizened old human being, nothing better. And as a young child said once when they read that book, I never believed in that kind of God, and nor do Christian believers. And this points to the fourth and final reason why the new atheism can be described as the new fundamentalism. And that is, it focuses only on the kind of God in whom creationists believe. It looks as though religious fundamentalism and atheistic fundamentalism need each other and feed on each other. What would happen if they actually moved away from a focus upon that creationist God, upon what you might call the God of classical Christian theism? And these four features of fundamentalism, whether it's religious fundamentalism or atheistic fundamentalism, means that there is a great lack of what the 19th century poet Robert Browning called the grand perhaps. There's a wonderful long poem of Browning called Bishop Blaugram's Apology, where he spends all night talking with an atheist. And he says to the atheist at one point, how can we guard our unbelief, make it bear fruit to us? The problem here, just when we're safest, there's a sunset touch, a fancy from a flower bell, someone's death, a chorus ending from Euripides, and that's enough for 50 hopes and fears of old and new at once at nature's self to rap and knock and enter our soul. The grand perhaps. Ladies and gentlemen, they don't allow that grand perhaps. And surely that's one of the features of fundamentalism. They don't really allow that to count against them. The kind of God I believe in is very, very different from the kind of God which they are attacking. It's the kind of God which is revealed for me at the end of Rabbi Hugo Grinn's great autobiography, where he says he was in Auschwitz as a child. He hoped God would rescue him. That God never came, and he cried and cried for hours. And then he realized that, as he said, people sometimes ask me, where was God in Auschwitz? I believe that God was there himself, he said, violated and blasphemed. The real question is, where was man in Auschwitz? So I suggest that the heart of this debate is the kind of God we do believe in or do not believe in.
Thank you very much indeed.